Hello, and welcome to the Right Perspective Podcast, Interview Edition. My name is Benjamin Davis. I'm your host, and today I'm joined by Pastor Evan McClanahan. Evan, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing well. All right. Well, we have a slightly different podcast for you today. Have a little bit of a, hopefully just a thought experiment, but Pastor Evan has an idea of how a potential civil war would go in the United States, so we're going to talk about that.
I'm Evan McClanahan. I'm the pastor down at First Lutheran in Houston, and I make them a little nervous every time I say that. I also do some ministry with Theology by the Pint in Houston, used to be called Theology on Tap. And we have a podcast called Theology on Air, so you can check that out. There's some social, politics, religious conversations that go on there, particularly with a show called White Pill Radio that I am a part of. So you can find us at flhouston.org and all of that good stuff. And I write for Everyman Commentary, which is Substack, everymancommentary.substack.com, which is actually my cousin's website. And so every now and then I've got, articles that I have to write. It's a good kind of thought experiment for me and, often fun. So I just in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination and some other thoughts, I actually think in a way Civil War is kind of, as my cousin said, kind of 2023. Almost kind of feels like maybe we're, kind of past that. It kind of seems silly. They had that kind of dumb Civil War movie made, and it's almost kind of a cliche now. But I wanted to just kind of lay out really what right and left kind of mean in the culture, and then kind of figure out a way past this, because it seems to me, and you can tell me if my observation is wrong or not, it just seems to me like that really we have kind of two different countries within this one nation. Right and left are just so far apart. There's really not a lot of common ground. Certainly dividing along religious lines, cultural lines. And I try to just list out all the kind of fissures, right? List them out. Here are the two sides. Ends up being ends up being an exercise in demonstrating how far apart we are, how difficult it's going to be to reconcile. And so therefore, if we're not going to reconcile, we're going to have some kind of either one side wins and one side loses, or we're going to have some kind of serious conflict like a civil war. So that's basically what I do in this essay that should be out at Substack, Everyman's Commentary Substack, pretty soon here.
Okay, sounds good. Before we dive into it, you're talking about the deep divide in the culture. Do you have two states in mind that you think kind of epitomize that? You think Florida and California, or you think Tennessee and New York, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. California's definitely got to be on one side, or New York. I mean, they're pretty linked, but maybe California because more of that state is really kind of radically left. Whereas in New York, it is kind of like New York City, and in Illinois, it's kind of like Chicago. The rest of those states are actually quite conservative, and there's a lot of conservatives, of course, in California as well. But yeah, I think these days, Florida, more than Texas, I would say for sure. There are a lot of issues in Texas. So yeah, if you kind of had to say, kind of look at the sides of the, the culture, the taxes, those sorts of things, the worldview, where Christianity is thriving. I don't know, Nashville seems, I don't know what's going on with Nashville, just like I'm not sure what's going on with Austin. So yeah, probably Florida versus California would probably be a good way of seeing it.
Sounds good. So give us an overview. What is this theory you have about the upcoming Civil War?
Well, I don't think there's going to be a civil war. I just want to say that right away. I don't see how any kind of group of states, given their geographical distance, like say New York and California, could actually kind of put together some kind of coalition. I don't think any group of states would be successful against the biggest military that the world has ever seen. So I don't see that happening. Like for example, you do see a little skirmish right now with Trump sending National Guard troops in to certain blue cities and states like Portland or Chicago, and, it's gone pretty smoothly. So that could be like that federal versus state rights, kind of issue that could become something more. So I generally speaking, I don't see any kind of organized war breaking out. I think that would be, it's impossible, frankly, for me to imagine. If for nothing else, you've got nuclear silos and like states, all over the place. We are going to be one nation. There's not going to be a national divorce. I think it's a practical impossibility. I don't think we could ever allow, for example, As much as I would like to give California and Oregon and Washington to like Canada or something, we could never allow that because then we would lose, the Pacific Ocean, right? We would lose that kind of a border, and so it just could never be allowed. We couldn't allow nuclear weapons to fall into the hands of a totally different country. So I just don't see that happening. So that said, what I wanted to do is just lay out the difference between the right and the left, broadly speaking. I think most people would be familiar with this, so I'll go pretty quick. But I lay out about 10 factors to look at. And so the first is like politics. What are the politics of the left? What are the politics of the right? So the politics of the left, some combination of socialism, communism, cultural Marxism, ironically these days, Islamism, because, you kind of think of that as pretty conservative, broadly speaking, and yet they're making good bedfellows up there in New York, for example. And then, of course, anarchism. You've got libertarians who are these days, given their lax moral point of view, kind of on the left, I would say more than the right. And then the right is a pretty broad coalition these days, far more broad under Trump than it is under Reagan. But generally speaking, most of us on the right are like conservative Republicans with a small r. You do have a couple of monarchists and libertarians, the Ayn Rand objectivists, thrown in for good measure. And it seems like after the elections on Tuesday, you've got like a young group of populists that really aren't conservative or liberal. They're not particularly well read, but they're just looking for some solution out of the unaffordability that America is. We're kind of like a post-capitalist, crony-capitalist country right now. I think you can make a case that we are pretty much a full-on socialist country in many respects already. And so I think young people are kind of like, if you can show me a way out of this, I'll go with that. So I think they could go either conservative or go kind of Mamdani's route. That's up to be decided. But generally, those are the politics. I would say this, that the left is still animated by this imaginary future utopia that is only made possible by forced collectivization, generally speaking. And the right still dreams of a free country, of limited government that is buttressed by a Christian moral foundation. And I think those two sides are not going anywhere, and I think they're exclusive to one another. They're irreconcilable. And the left has only hardened in that position since the 1960s or so. You could give reasons for that, but for now, those really are the two sides. Then I look at worldview, a big word, I know, but I would say basically the left, at least in my encounters with them, are totally atheistic or agnostic. Yes, there are some progressive or liberal Christians, who are kind of on the left, but honestly, they have more in common with, your average atheist progressive than they do with a conservative Christian. The right is pretty much exclusively Christian, although again, you'll have, the objectivist atheist type that joins the party, but those are basically the worldview sides. It's kind of atheist versus believer at this point. Even if only 4% of people or something say that they're atheists, they function in that way. Power centers, well documented now that the left controls all the institutions, everything from the academy to, the media to Hollywood to the universities, even Wall Street. Pretty much all those have drifted very far left over the last 50 years. Institutionally, the right doesn't have a lot. Right now, it has the Trump administration within the federal government, but it doesn't have the federal government. It's got a lot of state governments. And we have alternative media, which is actually pretty decent, I think. I'm not sure if it's an echo chamber right now or if it has impact. I think in big election years, it does have impact. But those are sort of the power centers. And so I think the right is known institutionally we're up against quite a lot. The enforcers. Who are the enforcers? Here's where I would say the right has the biggest advantage because the right basically has like the police and military, broadly speaking. Not like in Portland, but generally speaking, we have those on our side. Whereas, the left, I think we see Antifa, we see like with Charlie Kirk, seems to be like some kind of queer group with guns kind of going on as an enforcement group. We'll maybe learn more about that with his trial of his shooter. You've got Soros DAs. I think that's definitely part of the enforcer group on the left. And so those are kind of the two enforcer group sides. Like I said, this is, I think, one of the reasons you can't have something like a civil war, because on one side is like the American military, and on the other side are kind of disparate groups who are capable of terrorism, who are capable of guerrilla warfare, who are capable of assassination, who are capable of, making a raucous crowd at college campuses and surrounding ICE buildings from time to time. Whether it will ever be bigger or more organized than that, I'm not sure. This is really a thought experiment, which is who are the thought leaders? And I think on the left, you have to say the thought leaders are the entire educational system from kindergarten through the PhD level, which is almost totally full of leftists, given the university system produces teachers and so on and so forth. I guess on the left, you've got like Rachel Maddow, Hassan Piker, AOC, Tanji Brown Jackson, I guess, are thought leaders. On the right, we've got some pretty heavy hitters, obviously. I mean, I think even though I might have disagreements with some of the Daily Wire crowd, it's a pretty significant media imprint. Matt Walsh, I know he's there, but I kind of single him out in some ways from that crowd. You got Trump himself. You have Steve Bannon, Steve Saylor, and whoever's going to kind of fill in the Charlie Kirk gap. He's not replaceable, but you got a lot of people kind of up for that. So I think on the thought leader side, we definitely have an advantage as well. Whether the culture listens to our thought leaders, I'm not sure yet. And then this is kind of the big one, which is, what are the issues? What is the thing we'd fight over? I think in the actual Civil War, slavery, states' rights, state sovereignty, pretty significant issues. We have major issues in our culture now that are fissures. You've got open borders, you've got abortion, you've got the welfare state, you've got LGBTism, you've got the endless racial conflict, you've got equal outcome equity, right, versus equal opportunity. And then on the right is kind of the opposite of all that. Closed borders, America first, pro-life, theoretically debt reform, heteronormity, pro-family, all of that sort of thing. I don't know that any of those issues, though, are like enough to go, fight a kinetic war over, right? So that's why we're just going to have this kind of endless conflict brewing, because those sides are all, they're just not reconcilable. They're all major issues on each side. Then I tried to do a thought about what is the most radical position of each side. And the left is full of radical positions. I mean, abortion at any point would be way up on the list. But these days, I would say, and this isn't surprising given their view of abortion, but I would have to say that the favorability towards political violence, especially in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, is pretty shocking to a lot of normal people like me. And so I would have to say at this point, the radical left, what scares me the most about them is that they basically have no issue with the assassination of Charlie Kirk or with Donald Trump or Elon Musk, as that Rutgers poll found. I think on the right, our most, and I realize I'm going to bias my own side, but I think it's that we want to deport people who work on taco trucks and stuff. It's like we want like everyone out, even people who could benefit to our society. I mean, that's a pretty radical position to hold, is that you have to, that you would, go that far in like the deportations. But other than that, I don't find the right to be particularly radical. I mean, is being an abolitionist for abortion a radical position? How could that possibly be? We're defending human life.
Now,
Anyway.
when you say the most radical position, are you talking about the most radical position held by some people on the right, or the most radical position commonly held on the right
That's
or
a good
left?
question. I would say commonly held. Yeah, commonly held. I mean, I would exclude, for example, we could have a whole conversation about whether Nick Fuentes is on the right.
Okay.
Because I would say that there are some getting to be mainstreamed positions on, Israel, for example, and that's a whole debate right now. And I think there could be some pretty radical positions, but I would say they're not mainstreamed yet. Whereas I think if you look at polling, most everyone on the right is like, yes, deport every illegal immigrant, and I think that even those of us who are in favor of that position understand that that's a lot of people who actually, even though they are here illegally, pretty quiet, keep to themselves, work hard, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I'm saying?
Okay. Yeah.
Again, feel free to disagree with any of this. It'll, just jump in whenever. I'm just kind of going for the sake of time. Then as Christians, I think you and I would agree with this. What is their disposition? Well, the disposition of the left is nihilistic. That is, I think, a widespread point of view of the left. They're ultimately hopeless. They're ultimately, they don't see, any afterlife, that sort of thing. The right, I think, is still hopeful. I think it's still there. We're too pessimistic, but we are Christians, so I think that we are more hopeful. View of history, I think the left are like year zero French revolutionary types at this point. That's the symbolism of tearing down the monuments. They really, really do want to start over. Like, they really don't value the American Revolution. They don't value our Constitution. They don't value our Declaration of Independence. They are full-on statists, and so they are year zero nihilist, I would say. And I think the right still wants to, build on what in the past. We want to kind of go back to that. That's what conservation is all about. So then aesthetics, which I think is more cultural. I think it's kind of interesting. In the Sydney Sweeney interview that dropped is kind of ties right into this. On the right now, there are some, figures. There's a kind of glitterati on the right, and Trump wants to build big, beautiful arches. Trump is for classical architecture. The right generally embraces order and beauty and, going back to clean streets and clean neighborhoods. The left seems very comfortable with ugliness in many ways, brutalist architecture and green hair and tattoos. If I basically had to summarize it, it's that Ella Imhoff, Kamala Harris's, stepdaughter, is like said to be the new Sydney Sweeney, like the Sydney Sweeney of the left. And I'm going, okay, if that's the way you see things, good luck with that. Meanwhile, I think on the right, you're actually seeing, it's not a culture I particularly love, mind you, but there is like I said, kind of a young glitterati and an interest in order and beauty on the right that I think is emerging. And I think that's good. So those are kind of like the breakdown of the two sides, everything from the superficial to the, really foundational. But I'm just curious, like, as I kind of, went through that long rant, if you heard anything you might want to add or disagree with or anything like that,
Yeah, so it sounds like you're describing almost a cultural Cold War. If we're not actually on a organized level shooting at each other, but we're obviously already on the left is already shooting at us.
Right,
Right.
right. It's we're clearly into assassination culture, which is like the step before, a full-on kinetic war. I guess I'm optimistic, if you will, that that's all that they'll ever be able to achieve is assassination culture and guerrilla violence, which is not nothing at all. I mean, it's really bad, and I, sadly, we have to take a lot of steps to prevent it. But yes, I think that it's definitely a Cold War. The problem is, in a Cold War, you can't debate, right? I mean, again, as the cliche goes, that's what Charlie Kirk was doing, right? He was trying to debate. They're not interested in debate. That's why one side has to win and one side has to lose.
Right. I think if things get, I think at this point, probably if Trump does not crush the left, I think we descend into more anarchy and lawlessness. That's, as you said, we may not have the option so much for organized civil war, but we have the option for anarchy, right?
I agree with that. I think the closest we would get to some kind of like major broad civil war could be like 2020 on steroids. You could see, or think about, think of all the videos you've seen, on social media of a flash mob going into a jewelry store and ripping it off, or even going into a convenience store and like, ripping the shelves bare. I mean, we've never gotten tough on that. But we've never come out and, figured out a way to put the shopkeeper essentially in a position where he can defend his stuff. And until we do that, I think you could see, I mean, there's nothing stopping that from becoming totally normalized. And if that becomes really widespread or really organized, that would be pretty close. That would be so disruptive. That would be pretty close to like a kinetic civil war. It wouldn't be states versus the federal government, but it would be so seismic in the cultural divide and so terroristic in that way that it would have massive repercussions. So I agree with, well, I don't know if you're saying this outright, but I would say that Trump might not be able to accomplish it in his term, but a combination of several presidencies would have to really so radically change, really go back to a rule of order system, a pre-1960s radicalism, kind of culture that, yeah, we have to get really serious about this, and I do think we have to get really serious about it fast.
Yeah, we have to start taking care of these justices, these DAs, such like that are allowing the lawlessness in these cities, or we have to just get very comfortable with military being in our cities.
Yeah, or I would love to see, and I hope I'm not violating any Christian principles when I say this, but I mean, Trump is getting closer to saying this. I actually think Trump is inspired by Singapore, El Salvador, which are two of my favorite countries, because I think he's seeing that, they just don't tolerate crime. They just don't tolerate ugliness. They just don't tolerate trash everywhere. And I understand that those states or nations probably have a little bit less freedom than we do, but I think he's looking at those nations and he's saying, why can't we be that? That's what I want. He, for all of his for all of the accusations that he's like this crazy madman, I actually think he's extremely orderly. You know, he doesn't do drugs. He doesn't have tattoos. He believes in order. He builds beautiful buildings. Whether you like modernist architecture or not, it's a whole other thing. But he builds beautiful buildings, and they're clean, and they're, you know, and they're kind of standard bearers in many ways. And I think that's who he is. I think that's what he wants America to be. I don't think he wants it to be, you know, an embarrassment to the world anymore. And he realizes that we have been. There's just limits to what he can do. You know, so. But I think, you know, so he's kind of starting to come out, and he's kind of starting to say, yeah, if you're transporting drugs, we're just going to kill you. You know, and so I think it's one thing to say that about Venezuelan drug runners. It's something else to say, hey, you know, if you go into a jewelry store, you know, and the guy who runs the shop is armed, and he takes measures into his own hands for theft, mind you, theft, not murder. See, this is the problem, is that it's basically acceptable for someone to go into a jewelry store who's unarmed and steal whatever they want, because, you know, how do you defend against that? You know, so at some point we need to say, actually, you have the right to armed defend your store, whether it's insured or not. It doesn't matter. It's yours. They don't have a right to trash your store, and you have a right to defend that through, well, I'm just going to say it, through force, right? Through violence. And that sounds crazy. I'm reading a biography of George Washington right now, and people were executed for theft. George Washington oversaw the execution of his own soldiers who went into communities and pillaged because they were hungry. So that is what the old America thought of theft. And now we don't even allow store owners to protect their private property. When a mob comes up, you can't have the National Guard at every store, right? You can't have the National Guard on every sidewalk. And so we have to get serious about defending people's right to defend themselves and defend their property. And I think that's how we kind of nip this in the bud.
I think you're right on there. It makes me think of that Florida sheriff. I don't think he may not be a sheriff anymore. I think he moved up to like state representative or something. But they had a sheriff that was like, here in this county, if somebody breaks into your home, feel free to shoot them. Actually, we would prefer that. You know, save the save the citizen, save the taxpayers some money on the trial. Like, if we get that on the federal level, like, oh, that would be sweet.
Yeah, I mean, I think at some point we're going to have to get there. You know, the problem is it's just so diverse, right? I mean, you know, you can't, you know, the president can't tell the Tarrant County, you know, district attorney what to do, you know, or the Harris County district attorney what to do. So yeah, so those are some political problems to solve. But I will say that kind of unruliness is the closest thing we would have to a widespread kinetic conflict. But shy of, you know, kind of a civil war, just to kind of conclude here, my question is, if one side is going to win and one side is going to lose because we're so diametrically opposed, we're not going to find common ground. It's just not findable anymore. Where does each side go? What does victory look like for each side? And so on the left, I think we forget that in 2016, the left was extremely close to actually winning the Civil War. And they would have done it with a Hillary regime and packing the court. She would have gotten her 3 Supreme Court justices, which would have been, you know, and all the lower courts as well, which are year zero leftists, right? They're year zero leftists. They don't believe in America. They don't believe in the founding. They don't believe in the rule of law. And so I think that what you would have seen over time are basically, you know, the entire Bill of Rights dismantled in a one-state, one-party country at some point. Just like California is a one-party country, just like New York is going to become a one-party country, a state rather. You know, you would see that, you would have eventually seen that in America. There would have been no checks on electoral fraud. There would have been no checks through the courts. There would have been no, ability to address grievances through the court system. And I think that's what we were on the cusp of in 2016. And I think that basically the left would pick up right there if they could. They would import a whole bunch of illegals. I think they use homelessness and crime as destabilization tactics. I think it's basically a psyop. They don't actually want to solve that problem. I think that's pretty obvious by now. I think the LGBT movement is another group of useful idiots. I mean that in the most technical term, to destabilize, you know, family and the goodness of children, the goodness of reproduction, the goodness of Genesis 1 and 2. So I think you would see, you know, more hardcore leftism in our educational system to basically indoctrinate in a cult-like manner our children. So I think that that's what will happen, and that is how the left will win. If they can't fight a civil war, those are the things that they would do first. So on the right, I think we can be a little bit more optimistic though, because we currently, have power, and power is good. Power is useful if you use it for the right things. So what is our path? I think we actually have a lot of very good things happening. For example, I think that we're going to be picking up a lot of House seats in the next, 5 to 10 years through census reform, through the repeal of the Voting Rights Act, which is going to get rid of some kind of black-only gerrymandered districts in the House, about 20 seats, as I understand it. And then just traditional old-fashioned redistricting, like we've done in Texas, like other states are doing, to kind of pick up some seats. So that could be helpful if the House is courageous. It could be helpful. I'd love to see, election reform. So same-day voting, paper ballots, all of that. I think that would be a game changer. I think there could possibly have even been shenanigans in New Jersey and Virginia this time around. Hard to say, because we really, have not done a good job of investigating electoral fraud, and with the filibuster in the Senate, I'm not sure we'll ever get there, but I'm trying to be hopeful. I think that 2026 is going to be a great year for patriotism, for beauty, for the grandeur of America, because it's our 250th anniversary. So I think that's a good thing in our favor. We can sort of use that and tap into that bleeding of red, white, and blue in our citizenry. This has been said a lot, but, conservatives do have more children than the left. So, I think in the long run, the numbers will be on our side. I'd love to see like the 1776 commission, where Trump is really looking at pro-American teaching in our universities, put on absolute steroids. And I would say that using tax funds to go to un-American universities, I think we need to start pushing that envelope. We also need to be pushing the envelope of what we consider free speech. So I think pornography should be made illegal, because that has desensitized and just demoralized and really created a lot of problems for the youth in America. Obviously, I'd love to see a slashing of federal bureaucracy and federal regulation. Hopefully that goes without saying, that maybe this shutdown can be used for that. I'd love to see an end to either the income tax or property taxes, one or the other. I think both is unreasonable. It's just impossible politically, but you see more people talking about that. Trump has floated the idea. DeSantis is floating the property tax end. And so I'm hopeful that could be a big win. I would think it would be a massive win for the American citizenry. Although on the left, they're like, you're going to cut our taxes? How dare you? So that's, again, the way that we're just like from two totally different points of view. I'd love to see us go after the enforcers, right, on the left that I mentioned earlier, the Antifa types. We got to, who funds them? Who are they? We got to pull all that apart. And we got to bring back the sanatoria. I did look that up. That is the plural of sanatorium. Okay, so, but, Trump has talked about this. It's one of his executive orders. If homelessness is a destabilization psyop, which I believe that it is, well, we need sanatoria. We need a place to put those who are not well and who should not be living on the streets. We need beautiful cities again. We need clean streets again. And somehow, some way, we've got to get that back. And then this is more cultural, but, Christianity really has to be America's cultural and legal and moral foundation. There's nothing else. There's no other option for us. And I think what we're going to see in New York City is going to be interesting. For example, the New York City mayor can appoint his police chief and his fire chief. Someone said the other day, expect them both to be Muslim. So I think we're getting into some really interesting territory in some of these kind of carve-outs. The Dearborns, the Minneapolis, the New York City now. What does it look like to have a legal foundation that's not Christian? And so that's kind of where I see things. That's how we win. I think all that's pretty doable. I think all that's pretty reasonable. I think it's essentially nonviolent, and it doesn't mean we're going to win the whole country over, but we just need to win enough people over to consistently win elections and put things in our favor and kind of put in stone a lot of these ideas to basically act as a counter-revolution to the 1960s, un-American revolution. And that's kind of where I see things going. That's me being hopeful and trying to offer some solutions.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said. I like that. A lot of those are kind of top-down solutions. So I'll jump in with some bottom-up type solutions. I think we need to have our own counter long march through the institutions. We got to take those back. We got to fill them with godly Christian men. And I think we're in a better place to do that. There's a little bit more safety with a conservative federal government now.
Mm-hmm.
So we can start going into the universities and the schools and all these things. And then I want to add a caveat that I think is proper to that we're going to outbreed them. We only outbreed them if our children stay Christian and stay traditional.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're just adding to their ranks. So we as fathers, we have to raise our children well. We have to be doing family worship. We have to be teaching them why we believe what we believe. I think by this time this episode is out, I'm going to do a little plug here. I think I'll have my uh, family worship guide out on Amazon. So y'all can check that out on
Cool.
my
Very
Twitter
good.
profile. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm hoping that will really help people, men that want to do family worship but just don't know how to start. And it's got a layout, a template for every day of the month, leading your family in family worship. So if we're not doing that, we're not passing it down, and we're just adding to the left's ranks.
Yeah.
So those are
You're
some
you're right.
bottom up kind of things.
What happens is we create the children, and then they get them in the public school setting, or through the media and other cultural institutions, and they take them from us. That's certainly happened by the millions.
Yeah, yeah. So we got to be either homeschooling or Christian schooling. As Vodi Bakum says, don't send your children to Rome and be surprised to come back as Romans.
Yep. Yep.
We got to stop doing that.
Yep. A blessed
All right.
memory.
Vodi Bakum was a good man.
Yep.
First one.
I'm good friends with the pastor of that church now, Grace Family Baptist, and they're still doing good stuff. But yeah, I agree. We started homeschooling about 3 years ago, and I'm trying to build out a homeschool library here at the church. So if like our preschool, for example, parents start thinking about it, looking into it, we'll have curriculum and ideas for them and stuff like that. So couldn't agree with you more there.
Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. Well, Pastor Evan, this was an interesting conversation. I hope we go in the good way. We start
Same.
crushing the left and being better fathers, better teachers, and have a better culture.
Yep. Agreed.
All right. Well, you have a wonderful day. I'll hopefully talk to you again.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Take care.